Good afternoon. I'm Giulio Cavalli from Sanford Hospital and University in Milan, and I would like first to thank the organizing committee of this meeting for showing interest in the study entitled Adult Onset Infratentorial Leukoencephalopathy as Presenting Manifestation of the Giulio disease. And my aim is to convince you that ECD, which is still a rather obscure and elusive disease per se, may actually be the cause of some other conditions, which are namely leukoencephalopathies, which are similarly poorly characterized, but most importantly, currently untreatable. And my hope is thereby that some patients with leukoencephalopathy will be diagnosed as having ECD, thus benefiting from the major therapeutic advances we made in the treatment of this condition. Leukoencephalopathies are diseases characterized by extensive degeneration of the white matter of the central nervous system, and although in most cases these are hereditary diseases of childhood, they can somehow present in adulthood as well. And in these cases they present with a progressive incurable course which resembles that of degenerative disorders of the CNS. And in adult onset leukoencephalopathies, the etiology remains unknown in about 30 to 50% of cases. In the study, we will report the clinical and radiologic features of 9 adult patients with leukoencephalopathy, primarily affecting the cerebellum and the brainstem, and henceforth referred to as infratentorial leukoencephalopathy, or ITL. All these patients were initially followed up in a neurologic institution nearby our university hospital and were eventually diagnosed with ECD based on typical imaging findings and compatible histology. Due to time constraints, I do not have time to systematically illustrate all the clinical and radiologic features of all patients from our cohort, so I will rather describe a highly representative clinical case, the most representative of our cohort. The prototypical case is that of a middle-aged adult male with a clinical picture dominated by ataxia, which can be variably associated with other neurological symptoms such as spasticity, cognitive decline, cranial nervous function, commonly diabetes insipidus, or neurogenic bladder. The onset is gradual and the course is progressive over months or years, and typically the sole findings are at brain MRI, and are characterized by degeneration, involvement of the white matter of the cerebellum, of the brainstem, or of the middle cerebellar peduncles. Conversely, the involvement of supratentorial structures is very limited with minute lesions, and the clinical picture and radiologic picture is thereby that of a leukoencephalopathy with prominent infratentorial involvement. The differential diagnosis for such conditions is fairly broad. It includes autoimmune or inflammatory conditions as well as a plethora of hereditary disorders. But these conditions are quickly ruled out in our patient because he's an adult male, his case is isolated, there is no evidence of autoimmunity, and we did not find any evidence or test positive for hereditary conditions. And the examination of the CSF yielded unremarkable information. At this point, we speculated that the patient may have histiocytosis, and this is mostly because aberrant histiocytes and histiocytosis can lead to damage of the CNS in 2 ways. Most commonly, there is a direct invasion of the CNS structures, leading to the formation of intracranial mass-forming lesions. This is a fairly common clinical scenario, often observed in ECD patients. More rarely, we can observe an immune-mediated or inflammation-mediated damage of the CNS, which is thought to be paraneoplastic and which may lead to leukoencephalopathies. Although leukoencephalopathy of paraneoplastic origin associated with ECD is a very rare clinical entity, this is a fairly well-characterized condition in younger onset histiocytosis and in some cases of pediatric histiocytosis. Our patient is thereby subjected to investigations aimed at unveiling ECD, and both the bone scan and the PET scan yield very typical findings, and they also guide a confirmatory bone biopsy. As I said, this patient is representative of a cohort of 9 patients, and again, I do not have time to navigate you through all the minutiae, all the clinical details, but I do want to focus your attention on some neurologic and radiologic findings which make this condition fairly recognizable because they're highly consistent, at least in this cohort of patients. The clinical picture, as I said, is dominated by neurologic manifestations, chiefly ataxia, gait disturbances, and diabetes insipidus. Conversely, systemic manifestations are scant, if at all present, and most commonly silent. The radiologic counterpart of this clinical syndrome characterized by cerebellar dysfunction is indeed characterized by prominent infratentorial involvement, most evident at 2-2 weighted sequences, and the most commonly those structures are the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the cerebellar peduncles. And interestingly enough, in 6 out of 9 patients we also observed the involvement of the lateral columns of the spinal cord, and involvement of the spinal cord, as we know, is a fairly uncommon manifestation in Leukoencephalopathy disease. So, in conclusion, ECD emerges as a cause of adult onset infratentorial leukoencephalopathies, which is a finding with possibly highly relevant diagnostic and therapeutic implications. Brain involvement causing ITL may predate the clinical onset of systemic manifestations of ECD, and for both these 2 reasons, we believe that investigations aimed at unveiling ECD should be indicated in all patients with ITL, even in the absence of typical ECD manifestations. And of course, diagnosing ECD may enable therapeutic strategies in patients with adult onset leukoencephalopathies, which are an otherwise untreatable and chronically debilitating condition. I'd like to thank our colleagues working at the Neurologic Hospital, my professor and mentor, Onset. And thank you all for your attention, and I'm glad to answer your questions if you have any.
Thank you, Giulio. Questions for Giulio?
This is probably an obvious one, but I'm just curious. Any histologic analysis of any of the CNS lesions for any of these patients at any point?
We had, in one case, I believe in patient 6, we had a biopsy was done at the dorsal tubercular pedicle, but that was the only, there was obvious infiltration of foam tissue receptor. That was the only case in which biopsy was performed on CNS.
Nice presentation. So if I look at the biopsy column, some of the patients are wild type or they are all mutated?
No, about half are mutated, but some are wild type. But we only tested them for BRAF.
Okay, so you do have in your cohort patients who do not have, who are wild type for BRAF?
Yes.
And how many? No, in your whole cohort, like the whole patients, because
oh, you're referring to our studies, right? Yeah. So these are patients that we inherited from a hospital nearby. So some of these patients were tested before we actually started taking care of them, and of course we were not able to retest them. We didn't just re-perform a biopsy to test them again. So they were tested with technology that is not the one that we use at our institution. If that answers your question. So right now we do have in the cohort of patients that we call some that were referred to us that are negative for the mutation. Yeah.
And so for all the patients that you've been making biopsy at Milano, that you've been taking care of from the beginning, that you still all the patients you're biopsied are BRAF?
Not 100%, but close to that figure. Yeah. Not 100%, but I can't give you the exact percentage, but I can guess over 90% still.
Any more questions, Richard? Okay.
That was very nice. So I want to go home and go to the neurologist and ask for these patients. Just to recap for us, the key test is to then do some kind of skeletal survey, either PET CT or or bone scan, and then so for you the sensitive indicator is what is the characteristic bone lesion in this patient. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, the findings at PET scan or bone scan are almost pathognomonic for this condition. In most cases, they were able to guide at least the bone biopsy. Only in 1 out of 9 patients we do not have histologic evidence that there is ECD. The diagnosis was based on the analogy with the other patient and on the presence of a positive characteristic bone and PET scan. But yeah, I would suggest that the screening to go for is PET scan or bone scan or both possibly, because there could be they cannot be. Sometimes they're not consistent. But also in light of the fact that some of these patients had absolutely silent ECD outside the CNS involvement.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you again, Giulio. Thank you.